You've been taught to play the game of money. But what if the game itself is the trap? Rockefeller didn't play. He built the board, wrote the rules, and made you think fairness was the goal. The secret isn't to play better, it's to stop playing their game entirely. The financial world you perceive as a field of play is, in fact, a labyrinth, constructed with deliberate intent to manage and direct the masses. Its walls are built from comforting notions of hard work and fair play, yet its corridors are designed to benefit its architects. The inherent chaos is a feature, not a bug. A turbulent sea in which smaller ships are swamped while larger, better-designed vessels navigate with ease. This system doesn't reward the most earnest player. It rewards the one who understands the blueprint of the maze itself. Seeing the entire design from a perspective others cannot comprehend, mass psychology is the predictable current within this sea of chaos. The herd moves together, driven by the twin engines of greed and fear, making their collective actions foreseeable and, therefore, exploitable. To follow popular wisdom, to adhere to so-called best practices, is to willingly become a predictable data point in someone else's equation. True strategic advantage lies not in swimming faster with the current, but in understanding the tides, the gravitational pulls, and the unseen forces that dictate its flow, allowing one to position their vessel where the current is weakest and the destination is assured. The myth of pure meritocracy is the most elegant illusion within this structure. It suggests a linear relationship between effort and reward, a comforting idea that keeps the engine of society running. While effort is a necessary component, it is far from the determining variable. The system is not a ladder one climbs through sheer force of will, but a complex web of leverage points. Applying immense force to a non-critical point yields nothing. Applying minimal precise pressure to a leverage point can shift the entire structure. The master understands where to push, not just how hard to push. This reveals a duality of rules, the exoteric and the esoteric. The exoteric rules are taught in schools, celebrated in public discourse, and form the basis of conventional financial advice. They are the rules for the players. The esoteric rules, however, are not written down. They are observed principles of systems, power, and human nature. They govern how the game itself is altered, how the board is tilted, and how the labyrinth is reshaped. To play by the public rules is to consent to being a piece in the game. To understand the hidden principles is to begin to see the hand of the gamer. It was in this crucible of industrial chaos that John D. Rockefeller demonstrated a different form of intelligence. While his contemporaries engaged in frantic high-stakes battles, he moved with a deliberate, almost unnerving calm. He was not a mere participant in the chaos, he was a student of it, an analyst of its underlying mechanics. He saw the industry not as a collection of competitors to be vanquished, but as a disorganized system to be brought into a state of logical, efficient order. His calm was not passivity. It was the stillness of profound comprehension. The essential mental transition, then, is one of perspective. One must cease to see the world from the level of the board, reacting to the moves of adjacent pieces. The shift is to the vantage point of the player, looking down upon the entire board, seeing all the pieces, their potential paths, and the patterns they form together. It is a move from reactive participation to strategic observation, from being an element within the system to becoming a force that acts upon the system. This is the first, and most crucial, step out of the labyrinth. The fundamental weakness of human decision-making, especially in arenas of high stakes, is its vulnerability to emotion. Greed creates bubbles, fear creates crashes, and ego prevents one from admitting a mistake and cutting losses. These are not mere feelings. They are predictable systemic inputs that can be modeled and exploited. The average investor is a puppet, and his emotions are the strings. To operate from a place of fear or euphoria is to hand control of your own actions over to the architects of market sentiment, ensuring you buy high and sell low. Rockefeller's genius was rooted in a profound and disciplined emotional detachment. He viewed business and finance not as a dramatic human story, but as a vast, intricate piece of machinery. One does not get angry at a gear for slipping. One analyzes the cause, lubricates the mechanism, and corrects the process. He treated capital as a tool, acquisitions as systemic integrations, and competitors as inefficient variables to be solved. This cold, calculating logic was his impenetrable shield against the emotional contagions that ruined so many others around him. This perspective can be described as a drone's eye view. Imagine floating silently above the entire landscape of your industry. From this altitude, the frantic skirmishes on the ground become mere data points in a larger pattern. You do not feel the panic of a single retreating unit. You see the overall shift in the front line. You are not caught up in the euphoria of a small victory. You see how it affects the strategic balance of the whole map. This elevated, dispassionate view allows for decisions based on geometry and probability, not on adrenaline and hope. He weaponized the emotional state of the market. When others were gripped by speculative mania, he saw an overextension and quietly prepared for the inevitable correction. When a panic sent prices plummeting and blood running in the streets, he saw assets being sold for a fraction of their intrinsic value. He did not follow the herd's emotional stampede. He used the sound of its hooves as a clear signal to walk calmly in the opposite direction. The emotional consensus of the market was, for him, the most reliable contrary indicator imaginable. In this framework, patience and silence cease to be passive virtues and become aggressive strategic weapons. While competitors exhaust themselves in noisy, reactive maneuvers, the silent observer conserves energy and gathers information. Patience is not simply waiting. It is the deliberate act of allowing a complex situation to fully develop, giving your opponents the time and the rope to make critical errors. It is the quiet confidence of a predator that knows its target's path and has already positioned itself at the final destination. Now conduct a simple but profound mental exercise. Recall your last significant financial decision. Was its primary driver a cold analysis of data and a logical projection of outcomes? Or was it a feeling, the fear of missing out, the anxiety of a downturn, the excitement of a new trend? Be honest in your appraisal. The moment you can identify that emotional string and consciously choose to disregard it in favor of pure, dispassionate logic, you have taken your first step toward mastering the psychological game. The conventional view of competition is that of a noble race, a contest of equals where the best product or the hardest worker rightfully wins. Rockefeller perceived this as a profoundly flawed and primitive concept. To him, direct competition was not a virtue to be celebrated but a sin against efficiency. It represented a state of systemic disorder, a wasteful duplication of effort and resources, and an unstable environment that was inherently suboptimal. The goal was not to win the race but to render the race itself obsolete. His strategy was one of creating a corporate gravity. Instead of chasing dozens of smaller competitors, he focused on making his own operation, the Standard Oil Company, so massive, so efficient, and so fundamentally sound that it became the center of the industry's solar system. Smaller companies were not hunted down, they were simply pulled into its orbit by the inescapable force of its economic and logistical superiority. To resist was to fight against a law of nature, a futile and costly endeavor. The tactics he employed were those of assimilation, not annihilation. While he was capable of ruthless price wars to demonstrate the futility of resistance, his preferred method was integration. He would approach a rival not as a conqueror, but as an engineer proposing a more logical system. He would offer them a place within his larger, more efficient structure, often exchanging their volatile ownership for stable, valuable stock in his trust. He didn't destroy his enemies. He transformed them into components of his ever-expanding machine. Behind this was a deep understanding of human psychology, specifically the desire for security over sovereignty. He architected scenarios where the offer to be acquired was simply the only logical choice. A rival owner could choose to maintain his independence and face a prolonged, resource-draining battle against a superior foe, with the high probability of total ruin. Or, he could exchange his stressful, precarious position for a guaranteed and often immense fortune as a shareholder in a stable monopoly. He made cooperation the path of least resistance. The notion of a fair fight is a luxury for those with limited vision and resources. It's a game played on a small board. The Grand Master, however, plays a game of consolidation, understanding that true lasting power is not won in a series of small battles. It is achieved by fundamentally restructuring the entire strategic landscape until your position is no longer one of a competitor, but of the environment itself. The goal is to become the board, not the most powerful piece on it. This principle translates directly into the modern era. Stop thinking in terms of individual products competing in a crowded marketplace. Instead, think in terms of ecosystems and platforms. How can you build the underlying infrastructure upon which others in your industry must operate? How can you create a system where the success of others inevitably contributes, in some small way, to the strength of your own position? Do not compete for a piece of the pie, build a bakery. It is a common misconception that information itself is power. This is a dangerously incomplete truth. The real power lies in information asymmetry, the delta between what you know and what the rest of the world knows. A piece of information known by everyone has zero strategic value. A critical piece of data known only by you, or by a very small group, is the lever that can move the world. The goal is not to accumulate information, but to cultivate a persistent and significant information gap between you and everyone else. Rockefeller was a pioneer in building a corporate intelligence system that was decades ahead of its time. While others relied on rumors, intuition, and public reports, he was building a network to gather raw proprietary data. He knew the precise shipping costs of every railroad, the daily output of rival refineries, and the inventory levels in distant markets. This wasn't just information, it was a live numerical model of the entire industry. It allowed him to see the future not through a crystal ball, but through a calculator. The common mistake is to confuse signal with noise. The financial news, the expert opinions, the market chatter, this is overwhelmingly noise. It is designed to provoke an emotional response and generate activity. The signal is found in the unglamorous raw data. Shipping manifests, production volumes, inventory flows, and cost structures. The master strategist learns to completely ignore the noise and focus with monastic discipline on the subtle, often invisible, signals that reveal the true mechanics of the system. This requires an almost inhuman discipline. the ability to act on data even when it contradicts your own intuition or the screaming consensus of the crowd. If the numbers indicate that a particular asset is undervalued, you act, even if the public narrative is one of doom and gloom. If the data shows a market is dangerously overheated, you exit, even as your friends and neighbors are celebrating their paper gains. It is a commitment to let mathematical reality, not social reality, dictate your actions. He understood a principle of flow that few grasped. Owning the source of a resource, the oil well, was important, but controlling the conduit through which that resource must travel, the pipelines, the refineries, the railroad cars, was a higher form of power. By controlling the infrastructure of transit, he controlled the entire industry's metabolism. He could dictate terms not by owning everything, but by being the indispensable bottleneck through which everything had to pass. You can apply this by creating your own information asymmetry. In your chosen field, what is the critical data that everyone else overlooks? What boring metrics, if tracked consistently, would give you a predictive edge? Master a niche dataset. Build a small, private network of experts. Learn to read the primary sources instead of the secondary opinions. Cultivate a private, proprietary view of your world. That is where your power will be found. The modern corporate and financial world is enslaved by the tyranny of the short term. The relentless pressure for quarterly earnings, immediate returns, and instant gratification is a strategic disease. It forces decision makers to prioritize immediate, often trivial, gains at the expense of long-term structural advantages. This mindset isn't capable of building anything of enduring value. It is the mindset of a harvester, not a planter. A field that is only ever harvested will eventually turn to dust. Time is the most misunderstood and undervalued asset in any strategic calculation. Rockefeller's mental time frame was not measured in months or years, but in decades. He was laying the foundations for an industrial empire that he knew would take a generation to fully mature. This infinite time horizon allowed him to make investments and strategic moves that seemed nonsensical to his short-sighted competitors. He was not trying to win the next hand. He was playing a game that would extend for 100 hands to come. This long-term perspective is the key to unlocking the true power of compounding. The principle is most often applied to money, but its power is universal. It applies to knowledge, where learning a little each day builds into mastery over a decade. It applies to reputation, where small acts of integrity compound into unshakable trust. It applies to infrastructure, where each new pipeline and refinery made the entire system exponentially more powerful. He was a master of compounding every form of capital. Extreme patience provides a powerful strategic defense. The long-term player, unburdened by debt and the need for immediate results, can simply wait out the storms that sink more fragile vessels. Market crashes and economic downturns, which are existential threats to the short-term speculator, become unique buying opportunities for the patient capitalist. They are the fire that clears out the underbrush, allowing the strongest, deepest-rooted trees to grow even taller. This requires a profound psychological dissociation between your present self and the legacy you are building. The architect of a great cathedral works with the knowledge that he may never see the spires completed. The focus is not on personal, immediate glory, but on the perfection of the structure itself. You are building a system, an entity, a machine that is designed to function and grow long after you are gone. This is the ultimate act of strategic creation. Ask yourself a brutal question. Is your current strategy optimized for this month's results, or for the results of the next decade? Are you planting seeds for a future harvest? Or are you simply squeezing the last drops of juice from this season's fruit? The answer will reveal whether you are playing a finite game of temporary wins or an infinite game of enduring power. The choice of which game to play is entirely yours, but only one of them leads to true dominion. For Rockefeller, efficiency was more than a business tactic. It was a moral imperative, a quasi-religious duty. He viewed waste in any form, wasted time, wasted material, wasted energy, as a fundamental flaw, an offense against the natural order of a logical universe. This belief permeated his entire organization, from the highest levels of strategy down to the most minute operational details. The relentless war against waste was the central crusade of his industrial empire. This obsession manifested in a meticulous attention to detail that his rivals found baffling. The legendary story of saving a single drop of soda on each kerosene can is a perfect example. To an outsider, it seemed like an absurd micromanagement. But Rockefeller understood the power of scale. A single drop of soda, multiplied by the millions of cans his company produced, translated into thousands of barrels of oil saved, a sum that represented a significant fortune and a real competitive advantage. The strategy of vertical integration was the logical endpoint of this obsession. By owning every step of the process, from the wooden barrels that held the oil, to the chemical plants that treated it, to the wagons that delivered it, he was not just accumulating power, he was systematically eliminating external variables and the inherent inefficiencies of dealing with outside suppliers. He was transforming a chaotic supply chain into a perfectly calibrated, closed-loop industrial machine. This fanatical pursuit of efficiency created the most formidable competitive advantage of all, an unassailable cost structure. when the Standard Oil Company could produce and deliver refined oil at a fraction of the cost of any competitor. The game was fundamentally over. They could not compete on price without bankrupting themselves. The traditional levers of competition became useless against a foe who had so thoroughly optimized their internal mechanics. Fairness is irrelevant when one side is simply better designed. This reveals a powerful strategic principle. The most devastating form of attack is relentless internal optimization. While your competitors are busy watching each other, focused on outward-facing battles, you turn your gaze inward. You perfect your processes. You eliminate every ounce of waste. You streamline your operations until your organization moves with the frictionless grace of a well-oiled machine. By the time your competitors look up, you are no longer on the same plane of existence. Apply this as a personal audit, where in your own life and work is there waste. Look beyond the obvious financial expenditures. Where are you wasting time on low-value activities? Where are you wasting mental energy on unproductive worries? Where are you wasting focus by multitasking? Every inefficiency you eliminate, no matter how small, is a leak you are plugging in your own vessel, making it more resilient, more powerful, and faster than those around you. At the highest echelons of power, the game ceases to be about the accumulation of mere money. Wealth is a tool, a means to an end. The ultimate prize is the control of perception, the shaping of public opinion, and the establishment of legitimacy. One can have all the money in the world, but if they are perceived as an enemy of the people, their power rests on a fragile foundation. The final battlefield is the human mind, and the weapon is narrative. The deliberate transformation of Rockefeller from a reviled robber baron into a revered philanthropist is one of the greatest public relations maneuvers in history. This was not a simple act of late-life repentance. It was a calculated, strategic pivot. He understood that his industrial empire, having achieved near-total dominance, needed a new foundation to ensure its longevity, a foundation of social acceptance and moral authority. He set out to purchase that which he could not conquer, a positive legacy. His philanthropy was not a scattered, emotional act of charity. It was a strategic investment in the future's intellectual and social infrastructure. He did not simply give away money. He used it to create and shape the institutions that would, in turn, shape the minds of future generations. Funding universities, establishing medical research foundations, and supporting the arts were all ways of embedding his family's name and values into the very fabric of society. By financing the creation of institutions like the University of Chicago and the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, he was doing more than just giving back. He was seeding the future with his worldview. These institutions, built with his capital, would go on to produce leaders, scientists, and thinkers who would operate within the paradigms he helped to establish. It was a way of ensuring his influence would not only survive him but would continue to compound for a century or more. The ultimate defense is control of the narrative. When you can influence how history is written, how your actions are framed, and what values society holds dear, the objective facts of your past become secondary. Perception, when managed at a societal scale, solidifies into accepted reality. By becoming the great benefactor of humanity, he retroactively sanctified the very methods that had earned him his fortune, recasting ruthless business tactics as the necessary work of building a modern world. The lesson for the modern strategist is clear. Your story is a critical asset, your personal brand, your company's mission. The narrative you construct around your work, these are not peripheral concerns. They are central to your power and influence. You must be as deliberate in crafting your story as you are in crafting your product or your investment portfolio. In the long run, the person who tells the most compelling story wins. The ultimate objective was never merely to dominate the oil market. It was something far more ambitious: to create a closed, self-sufficient, and self-reinforcing system. The goal was to build an entire economic universe where the Standard Oil Company was not just the biggest player, but the sun around which all other bodies were forced to orbit. In this universe, the company's success was not a possibility. It was a physical law. Consider the elegance of the structure. The company controlled the extraction of the crude oil, the pipelines that transported it, the refineries that processed it, the factories that made the barrels to contain it, and the distribution network that brought it to the final consumer. Each stage of the process was not a separate business, but an interlocking gear in a single vast machine. The profits from one stage funded the expansion of another, creating a powerful feedback loop of perpetual growth. This is the principle of strategic inevitability. It involves positioning yourself in such a way that all paths eventually lead to you. You are not simply an option in the marketplace. You are the context in which the market operates. By controlling the critical infrastructure, the transit, the processing, the data, you make yourself indispensable. Others may produce the raw material, but they must come through your gates to reach the world. And for that privilege, you set the terms. This is the platform mentality, taken to its logical extreme. Instead of focusing on selling a single, competitive product, you build the stage upon which the entire industry must perform. Amazon did not just sell books. It built the marketplace where all sellers must compete. Microsoft did not just sell software. It built the operating system on which all software must run. This is a higher form of business. You are not playing the game, you are providing the casino, and the house always wins. This approach renders traditional competition almost meaningless. How does a small, independent refinery compete with a system that owns the pipelines and sets the freight rates? It cannot. It's like trying to compete with the force of gravity. The smaller entity can either choose to be integrated into the larger system on the system's terms, or it can be marginalized into irrelevance. The fight is over because the very ground has been tilted against them. You must begin to think about how to create a closed system in your own career or business, even on a micro scale. How can your skills, your network, and your products be designed to feed and reinforce one another? How can you create a workflow where the output of one project becomes the essential input for the next? Start by building a small, self-sustaining loop, a personal ecosystem where you control as many of the key variables as possible. We have explored the architecture of a different mind, a mind that operates on cold, dispassionate logic, viewing the world as a system to be engineered. We have seen the principle of assimilation, where competition is not won but transcended. It is a mind that thrives on information asymmetry, on seeing what others do not, and acts on an almost geological timescale, far beyond the frantic pace of the crowd. It is a mind obsessed with efficiency and the control of narrative. Realize that these are not a collection of tactics to be deployed piecemeal. They are the interconnected components of a complete philosophical operating system. To adopt one without the others is to miss the point entirely. It is the synthesis of all these principles, the cold logic combined with the infinite time horizon, the information advantage combined with the control of perception that creates a truly formidable strategic intelligence. The ultimate secret of Rockefeller is not found in the specific actions he took, but in the fundamental way that he thought. To study his price wars or his corporate structures without understanding the underlying psychological framework is to mistake the shadow for the object. Many have tried to imitate his tactics and failed, because they were copying the moves without ever understanding the grand, unifying theory of the game. This framework is not limited to the world of finance or industry. It is a universal lens for understanding and navigating any complex competitive human system, from corporate politics to international relations to the building of a personal career. It is a method for identifying leverage points, understanding hidden incentives, and acting upon the deep structure of a system rather than its chaotic surface. It is a blueprint for the acquisition of agency. Embracing this way of thinking comes at a cost. It requires a degree of intellectual isolation. It demands that you stand apart from the comforting consensus of the crowd, that you learn to trust your own analysis over the pronouncements of experts, and that you develop a comfort with being misunderstood. To see the world as a system to be architected is to necessarily separate yourself from those who are content to live within the pre-existing design. And so, the final challenge is a profound one. It is to stop searching for the secret map to success, for the 7 easy steps or the guaranteed formula. These things are created for the masses, to keep them occupied within the labyrinth. The real work is to accept that there is no map. There is only the territory and the tools of logic, perception, and will. The task is not to find your way through the game. The task is to become its architect. The true game of money is won not on stock tickers or in boardrooms, but in the silent internal theater of the mind. It is a contest of psychology, of perspective, and of philosophy. The concept of fair play is a carefully constructed boundary, a rule set designed for the many, to ensure the stability of a system that benefits the few. The enduring lesson from a mind like Rockefeller's is that you do not win an unwinnable game by being the strongest player. You win by fundamentally reshaping the game itself. Your journey starts not with an action, but with a question. What is the one fair rule you follow that is, in truth, limiting your entire field of vision? Leave your reflection in the comments, and if you are ready to continue deconstructing the invisible architectures of power, subscribe and enable notifications. The next lesson may redefine your reality.